Okay, so uh, ever get that like first day of school feeling? You know, that like nervous energy, kind of wondering what you're in for.
Yeah, totally.
Now, like, bottle that up and airdrop it into a boarding school in Kenya.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, and oh yeah, there might be like actual monsters hiding in the shadows.
And that's what makes Mono so fascinating, right? It's just, well, this film really grabbed the attention of the Kenya Rock Film Festival folks, and it's not your typical coming of age story. It's more of a deep dive into like all those anxieties we feel growing up, but set against this backdrop of boarding school life. And
Not just any film festival, right? This one's known for like showcasing stories that use rock music to say something, to challenge the norm.
it's,
So the fact that they chose mono, it tells us there's something deeper going on here.
oh, absolutely. What hooked us was how Mono blends, get this, comedy and horror.
Really?
Yeah. And it's in this unexpected setting, right? It's not just about like jump scares in the hallway. It's about the everyday horrors, those awkward, cringy parts of growing up.
So we're working with this review from the Kenya Rock Film Festival blog, and the writer really zeroes in on this feeling of being trapped. They even quote it directly: trapped, boarding, no going home, no escape.
Yeah, and that's brilliant because it makes you think of classic horror movies. The isolated location, all those strict rules, the feeling that something could like jump out at you.
Right, right.
But what's cool here is that Mono takes those classic horror things and turns them inward, making it about the mental and emotional struggles of being a teenager.
And haven't we all felt that, right? I mean, the pressure to fit in, worrying about what people think of you, all those awkward social dynamics, it can feel like a monster in itself. The
Totally.
blogger even says there are two kinds of monsters: the obvious bullies and then the psychological ones.
And those psychological monsters are where things get really interesting. The blogger digs into this idea of ego death, even referencing an article from Psychology Today.
Ego deaths.
Yeah, so it's like those experiences that chip away at who you are, moments that make you question your worth.
It's not literally dying, but more like having your ego dismantled piece by piece. That's scary in a whole different way than, say, a monster under your bed.
Exactly. And the film seems to be exploring how these characters navigate that exact fear, right? They're thrown into this intense environment, dealing with social pressure and these subtle attacks on their identity that could lead to, well, that ego death.
And from what I'm gathering, this film doesn't hold back on showing how rough that can be. Like, the blogger even pulls some lines straight from the trailer, really showing that ego death in action. Like, whatever your parents taught you stays at home.
Ah, that is brutal. That line just like instantly strips away any sense of security those new students might have. It's like they're being told to leave their old selves behind.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about a harsh welcome. And it gets, like, even more intense with those insults they throw around. The blogger mentions a few, like, your head is full of porridge. Why are monos taking window seats?
Yeah.
They're not just, like, messing around. These are meant to make you question who you are.
Exactly. And that's what's so unsettling about those moments, right? It's like they're tapping into these universal insecurities, those fears we all have of not being good enough, smart enough, fitting in. And by putting those experiences on screen, Mono forces us to really think about how much those psychological blows can hurt.
It's like taking those typical growing up pains and, like, amplifying them, right?
Yeah.
But amidst all this talk about fear and, ego destruction, the blogger brings up something kind of interesting. They mention that their own time at boarding school lined up with, like, the rise of rock music in Kenya.
Ah. Oh, yeah. And that connection is really important, I think. Music, especially rock, can be so powerful, especially as a teenager. It's like this outlet for all those intense emotions, right? A way to find other people who just get it.
Totally. Yeah. It's like finding your people, your crew, right? Sharing the love for a band or even just a song. It's such a powerful thing, especially in a place that can feel as isolating as boarding school.
Exactly. And, the blogger specifically mentions bands like U2, Alanis Morissette, artists who aren't afraid to get real about those feelings of teenage angst.
It makes me wonder, like, does the film actually feature Kenyan rock music?
Yeah.
It'd be really something to see that woven into the story, to hear those unique voices and experiences come through.
Oh man, that's a great question. And honestly, the blogger doesn't really go into detail about the specific music, but it definitely makes you wonder, right? Does Mono use music as its own character, as a way to explore what it means to be Kenyan and the power of finding your voice through art?
Okay, see, now I really want to see this movie, but switching gears a little, the blogger mentions this one character who seems to offer like a glimmer of hope in all this darkness. A female literature teacher, actually.
Yes, and she's a really intriguing presence. It's like she represents something different within the school,
Yeah.
Not about tearing students down, but building them up. The blogger talks about her being this positive force for the monos, but they don't get into specifics.
It's like they're leaving us hanging, right?
Yeah.
Making us wonder what kind of impact she actually has. Does she use literature to inspire them, to challenge how they see the world, to show them there's more out there than just boarding school?
Yeah. I mean, does she see their struggles, their anxieties, and offer guidance without judgment? There's so much potential there for her to be this source of strength and inspiration, especially in such a high-pressure setting.
It's like that saying, it takes a village, but in this case, it's a literature teacher in a Kenyan boarding school who might just be part of the village those kids need,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about, like, the impact one person can have, especially in a place like that. But you know what else I keep thinking about? It's that idea of, like, finding your voice.
Hmm.
It seems to be a big part of what Mono is about, right?
Absolutely, and that's where the Kenya Rock Film Festival being involved really stands out. They're not just showing films with music. They want stories that go deeper, about identity, about expressing yourself, about going against the grain.
Right, right. So it's more than entertainment. It's about art that makes you think, that
Mhm.
sticks with you. And Mono, with all this stuff about fear, belonging, and finding your people, it kind of fits right in.
Totally. And remember those song lyrics the blogger mentioned? Something like, you gotta be bad, you gotta be bold, you gotta be wiser. I mean, those words hit different in this context. It's like encouraging young people to be themselves, to find their voice, even when it's scary or they're unsure.
And doing all that in a culture that might have its own, like, hurdles and expectations. I mean, we see so many of these coming-of-age stories from, like, a Western point of view. But Mono gives us a chance to explore those same ideas from a totally new perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so interesting, right? We're not just looking at one film, it's like opening a door to a whole different culture.
Mm.
And it makes you wonder, how are those themes, rebellion, finding yourself, how do those look different in a Kenyan context?
It's like the film becomes like a starting point,
Yeah.
for a much bigger discussion about identity, the power of art, even just like the things we all go through as humans, no matter where we're from.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to leave things. So if you're curious, if this got you thinking, don't stop here. Check out Mono if you get a chance. Explore some Kenyan rock music. See what it's
Yeah.
all about. You might be surprised what you find.
I know I'm adding it to my list.